On behalf of the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc., thank you for joining us today. My name is Elisa Joseph, and I'm Director of Programs for USBC. This webinar is brought to you by our sponsor, Wells Fargo. For companies that receive CARES Act funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, there is a provision that is quite an incentive: loan forgiveness. However, now is the time to prepare and ensure you are positioned to take advantage of this loan forgiveness. Today, we're going to discuss what is required under the CARES Act to have your loan forgiven, what steps you may need to take to provide proof that the funds were spent as requested. We'll also talk about the tax implications of this legislation and the legal implications that can occur if not used properly. USBC is happy to have two presenters today. We're not only tax and legal professionals and experts, but members of the USBC Board of Directors. Please join me in welcoming Bridget Gagne, CPA, MBA, Managing Partner of Gagne & Associates, and Amy Griffin Joyner, Esquire, Managing Partner of the Griffin Firm PLLC. They will share their experience and expertise in tax accounting and tax law, as well as provide insights into weathering through this pandemic. As always, if you have questions, please submit them to us using the form at usblackchambers.org/cares-act/. You can also register for upcoming webinars and send your questions on those topics to us in advance. Let me start by sharing some background on our speakers today. Bridget Gagne, CPA, MBA, is an entrepreneur and former banker who is the managing member of Gagne Associates CPAs, a full-service CPA firm, and is co-founder of Not Your Average Bean Counter training organization. Bridget has extensive experience working with small growing businesses as a CFO, controller, and advisor. She also successfully developed accounting departments for various size organizations. She has worked with businesses and nonprofits to execute business strategies and assist them in raising both debt and equity capital. Bridget is a proud Texas Longhorn. She holds a BBA in accounting and an MBA both from University of Texas at Austin. Bridget was an accounting professor for Howard University as well. She is licensed as a CPA in DC and Texas. She serves on the board of the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc., and is on the board of the DC Board of Accountancy. She is also a member of various professional and civic organizations. Attorney Amy Griffin, principal of the Griffin Firm PLLC with offices in Washington, DC, Prince George's County, and Baltimore, Maryland, and Arlington, Virginia, is committed to supporting the creation, protection, and transfer of wealth with estate and business planning. Griffin Firm works with individuals and families to create generational wealth retention strategies. At this writing, the Griffin Firm is proud to claim 5 African-American women legal minds that work together to strategically plan how to create, protect, and transfer minds. The firm uses trust and estate planning to support families to build generational wealth using tools that minimize taxation and build equity for successive generations. With this mission in mind, Amy has earned an LLM, Master's in Laws, in Elder Law and Estate Planning. Amy is the founder of the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, an organization committed to community economic development, the collaboration of financial professionals, and economic education. Amy was recognized by the SBA as a New England Minority Small Business Champion. She is committed to support community growth through education and speaks regularly in national, regional, and local forums to educate other attorneys and the community. Amy is a monthly contributor to the Washington Informer. She strongly believes when we know better, we can do better. Let's join in welcoming both Bridget and Amy to our conversation. Good afternoon, ladies.
Hey, Elisa.
How are you?
Awesome. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Thank you so much for doing this today. I'm so excited about what this conversation is going to be, where it's going to lead us, and how both of you could just provide kind of information that I know is so critical to our businesses. So I'm going to start with you, Bridget, first, okay? This must be an extremely busy time to be an accountant. I just can't even imagine what it's like for you right now.
You can't.
In what way are you assisting your clients during COVID-19?
Well, we initially started with helping our clients to apply for the loan and, submit the documentation, which was a relatively simple task for us because, we deal with numbers all the time. But our focus really is and has been since we started hearing about this PPP program is compliance. We knew that on the back end of this thing that people were going to have challenges with compliance, because just as I was listening to the AICPA and different, governing boards for us as CPAs, they were like, well, we're not sure. Well, this is what we think it is. We're not sure. So, and there's still a lot of, question marks around this legislation and how it's actually going to play out. But what we're counseling our clients is, look, let's get make sure we have the documentation. Let's make sure we're attributing, the payroll the way it's supposed to be. So we've created a couple of tools for our clients to work with in order to make sure that we're using the money for what it's intended. We want to make sure that we can get it as much forgiven as possible. Now, what a lot of people don't realize, and we found out, is that, they go, oh, well, I'm going to just spend the money however, and that's fine, more or less, but it doesn't mean it's going to be forgiven. So you got to make sure, we're just making sure that we're counseling our clients to say, look, here's the PPP money, here's how we're applying it. So we have clients who make more than 100,000. So how are we isolating that? So creating not only a modeling the use of the funds, but also making sure, do we have the payroll documentations? We're going to need to have the 941. So we're carving out sort of a COVID compliance readiness for our clients. So that's what we've been doing. We've really just been wanting to stay on top, because 8 weeks is going to go by quickly, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh my God. So we don't want our clients scrambling, trying to say, well, where's all the documentation? We're making sure we're managing that as we go.
And Amy, I have to say, I know through just working with USBC as we were getting, from an advocacy perspective, just the legislation coming through and reviewing it and seeing kind of all the twists and turns. And literally, I think we spent almost like 2 or 3 weeks with a change every single day. So for you, if we've had to do that, we know many businesses have had to move quickly to adjust to this new normal, right? What are the legal implications that are coming into play when not only you're having to deal with this legislation, but you're moving your business from being in a physical location to now an online location? What's happening? What are the kinds of things that you're seeing and you're talking to your businesses about?
Oh, it is indeed a dynamic, crazy space.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the first and foremost is, what have you committed to? Because in between the different rounds, you are only held liable for those things that you committed to.
Right.
Right. And so, as we know, many times we, as we always check the box as we go through, the internet, I check the terms, right?
Right.
But I encourage people that now that we have the money, read the terms, right? Because between round one and round two, the terms changed a bit.
Mm-hmm.
As well as your bank may have different rules and expectations. Read the terms that you committed to.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't understand them, bring them to a lawyer so that you make sure you know that you understand what you're agreeing to. And in many, many, many cases, not all, we're thankful for getting the money, and we're, even if it's not forgiven, it may have been the injection that you needed, and the terms are pretty favorable. But again, we want to know what we're positioning ourselves for and how do we manage it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I would say, I know most people, just as this was moving so quickly, I'm sure as they got their documents together, they got approved, they went in, they signed their loan paperwork, it started off with just a one-page application, right? So the loan papers probably aren't as detailed as they were probably in the past for other types of loans. So for both of you, you spend a lot of time helping businesses get their documents together, whether it's for PPP or just what they have to do in terms of their normal day-to-day. So for me, I'm really concerned about what the aftermath of securing this funding looks like. As you both have said, you can just use the money and not worry about it being forgiven if that's not on your plate. If you are worried about it being forgiven, what are you suggesting that they do so that the pieces that can be forgiven, that does become a reality for them?
Well, I'll start. As I said, tracking and keeping all of your supporting documentation, that's the most important thing, because what's going to happen is the way this thing plays out is that the SBA is guaranteeing the banks that they'll be paid back, because banks took money out of their own coffers to fund this, and the SBA is saying, okay, when the time comes, we're going to guarantee everybody's loan. So that's why to your point, you have terms and conditions, because if there is a non-forgivable portion, then you got to pay that back. And what are the terms of forgiveness? And so the banks are concerned about that. So what we want to do is make sure that, again, documentation is critical. I know, like your utilities, some people's utilities on auto pay. Well, go find that utility bill, because you're going to have to provide supporting documentation. Now, let me say this. You mentioned about, you check these boxes of certifying and, the terms and conditions and things like that. And we sometimes blindly check these boxes, not realizing what the implications are. And one of the things is that you want to be sure that you may have to prove that you actually needed the money, that you didn't have the cash in the bank. There has to be some way to prove that you really, in fact, needed that money immediately, because that's where people get into trouble when we start hearing about fraud and all of that. And then if you didn't, there's so many moving pieces to this, that if you took the money and you didn't need it, there are implications to that, right? Because they're saying there are people who needed it that didn't get it, right? And should you have taken it if you didn't need it? So those are the things you really have to think about. Did I really need it? Really tracking, having a good account. Now's the time more than ever to have a good accounting system. Right, I say that because I'm an accountant, I work with a lot of small growing businesses, and that sorts to kind of thwart the growth process. Now more than ever, businesses need to make sure that they have good accounting systems and practices in place, and that's really what we're encouraging.
So yeah, one of the things I guess I wanted to reiterate, which is why Ruth Chris gave their money back, the Shake Shack, because they couldn't say they absolutely needed the money under pains of perjury. So and on one level, we're okay with, many folks, I'm okay with having to pay it back. You're not okay with them saying, oh yeah, you perjure yourself.
Right.
That's a whole different level of binding. Like, I don't mind paying that 1% interest back. But if you're going to say, bring me up on charges of perjury, there's a higher level of commitment. So we need to, again, be thoughtful about what is it that put you in position to say that you needed it imminently.
Yeah, this wasn't sort of the creation of, let me just have, some funds in case of. Right? This really had to be, you were in an emergency situation. And in order for me to, keep my 10 employees on, I needed the money to do that. Right. Not that I just needed the money to, almost like a line of credit. I just needed to have it on hand just in case. This was not that situation. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think, to your point, it's one of these things that it's a catch-22 almost, because you needed the money when you applied for it, but it could have taken 4 weeks before you got the money. Right. So it's like now you kind of going. So I think that I'm going to say, I hope, I'm not going to think about, I'm going to be hopeful that the SBA is going to be understanding of, you know, this timing difference that we needed. You know, they said, okay, you got to spend it in 8 weeks, but if it took me 4 weeks before I got it, I'm scrambling, right, to get it together. And remember, the SBA is an institution, but institutions are people. So we've got to be, we're going to be dealing with people. So we have to keep our calm about this when we're dealing with people. So
yeah, and I think you have to really justify, have your rationale justified around what you did and when you did it.
Right.
Right? Exactly. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You need to be thinking about what your response will be. I always say as a lawyer, before the question's asked, know what the answer is going to be. Why did you need that money, and what did you do with it? So if you, if you indeed used it for payroll, but then now all of a sudden you have $250,000 in the bank saved, did you really need it? You know? So have those questions answered before they're asked.
Right. Exactly. That's good.
I mean, my next question is for you. Many businesses have had to change their business models, right, to adjust this new environment, particularly when we talk about things like social distancing, right? Or, if you're in an office space, I think it's great if you're in an office, you can close your door and it's just you in there. But if you're sitting among a bunch of cubicles, right, that makes a little bit of a difference as to what has to happen, right? So is this a good time to consider succession planning as a firm? You know, there's so many things that we put off because we don't really need it right now. This is like a whole new normal. Everything really flipped on a dime. While we're thinking about what has to happen to keep the business going, is this another thing that needs to be put in place? Like, is now the time to do that?
Well, at least I'm a lawyer, so of course my answer is yesterday was the time. Right? But Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind, right? So, and I will say to you, also this pandemic should have compelled us to always be looking ahead, not just in case of a pandemic, but it is, where do we want to go? I will tell you honestly, and I'm almost embarrassed to say, is this forced us in my firm to move online much more quickly than we wanted to. Mm-hmm. But then also we need to be thinking about, in addition to this impact, because we don't know when Corona is going to go away. Right. So even if they say the laws say we can open, again, praise the Lord, law firms are essential businesses. So we did not have to quote unquote close. But I'll tell you, the hundreds of people that we were supposed to meet with in group formats didn't happen.
Yeah.
So, but when I say that, I say, how did the implications are so much greater than just, oh, gee, we need to change where we're going to meet. So although we have office space where folks come into the office, we also had parents with children they had children. Right. And so could I fire them because they had to stay home and take care of their kids?
Right.
So we had to be thinking about those legal implications of how we needed to transform. It's not just from going from from on-ground to online. There were so many other ripple effects that were impactful. Right? Mm-hmm. So we need to figure out now, as we're all walking around with masks, what is the new iteration of our practice going to look like, right? So, because I imagine, as we're planning for our business, that the next few years, people are not going to try to be hanging out together. Yeah. So, and I don't know when school is ever going to go back. Can I fire someone because they can't come to the office? Mm-hmm. And will I be sued if I make them come to the office, not because they have kids, but if I make them come to the office and then they get sick, right? Those are the employee considerations that we need to factor in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when we think about, succession planning in and of itself, it's who am I passing my business on to, right? But I think as you're iterating, we have to go beyond that. There are HR considerations in this. There are business operations considerations in this. The plan is a lot larger than just the inheritance side.
And the scope is so much.
And the scope is bigger, right?
Absolutely. Right. There's this, as we think about succession planning, this and on one level opens us up for so many things, right? Mm-hmm. So many opportunities, because the world is no longer my neighborhood. when we go online. The
Right.
world it's a global opportunity of succession, right?
Right.
But that's only for some industries, as you mentioned, with Bridget being licensed in DC and in Texas. You know, it's now my license is, and our firm covers a number of states. We have like 5 states that we're represented in building the
Right.
network. But we need to be thoughtful and careful about, in my succession, if someone wants to buy my practice and they don't have a license, am I liable? If I'm going to
Absolutely.
provide, advice, I mean, I can invite and I can offer business advice generally to any state, but my estate planning work is very different. So we need to be very careful about who we're providing information for as we're doing the succession work, right? Looking at our next generation, as well as Corona has been really very daunting in that here today and people have been gone tomorrow who we thought were perfectly healthy. Right. So, or in ICU. So that's why I say yesterday we should have been planning for, because if I'm going to be in ICU, who's going to run the practice? We can't wait until, we aren't given a date to say, oh no, you're not going to be able to work anymore after this. Right.
Right. Yeah, I think those points are so valid, because this changed a lot of things. When we talk about people particularly being hospitalized, right? You can't go see that person in the hospital, right? So the whole visiting piece changed, the ability to communicate with that person, the ability to have the medical directives taken care of in the way that you want it, or the way that they wanted to have them done. You don't know if that's happening or not, because nobody can physically be there, advocate, or to check on anything.
Right. And I know that there was a conversation on intellectual property. One of the things, and cybersecurity, it is, most of us know that cell phones are not secure, right? So having that conversation on a cell phone, there's no confidentiality there, right? So what are you putting at risk as we go online? The remote capacity is confusing for many.
Right. Absolutely.
I just want to interject. One of the things that, we sort of talked with our clients about before COVID was sort of as morbid as this is going to sound, is if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, who's going to run your company, right?
Right.
So anything, to your point, now COVID makes that, just pulls that, Amy, I'm sure you'll agree, it pulls all of that to the front of because we go, or like when you start a partnership, maybe you don't get a partnership agreement in place. You don't have all the things, and you say, oh, because they're my friend and we're going to be good, we're going to be friends forever. But things change and we haven't prepared for that change. And I think that we have to live in the present, plan for the future, right? And let the past inform us. But we do have to think about, okay, do I have processes in place? Do I have systems in place so that if I'm not here, who's going to continue to do the work that I do? Do I have someone to do that?
No, I think that's very, very true. So with that being said, do either of you have an example of how kinds of tax implications that are coming forward, whether due to the funding or whether due to just operationally, how someone has to move through, how a business owner may have to navigate the waters. Do you have any examples that you can share with everyone that really makes the real life implication of this so pressing that I need to do this tomorrow?
Right. Well, one of the things that I will say, along the tax implication side, let me say this. In the full scope of the legislation, it talks about how you can use retirement funds, how your minimum distribution. So I don't want us to forget about that part of it as well, because it's more into the legislation than this loan and the loan forgiveness. So I advise people to talk to their trusted advisors and say, okay, what are the other things that I can do? Maybe you can take money out of your 401k, because there are a lot of businesses, especially among Black businesses, that only have 1099, right? 1099 contractors. So it's like they didn't or couldn't go after the PPP money in the traditional sense. So there are other, like deferments on your retirement and things like that. one of the pieces of legislation says that you don't have to pay payroll taxes for a period of time, right? So there's been a deferral of your payroll taxes, right? Now, one of the things that we have to be mindful of, let's say I defer my taxes and they don't become, then they're due over a 2-year period, 50% by December 2021, the other 50% by 2022.
Mm-hmm.
If the business, if the company goes out of business, the individuals are still liable for those taxes. They're not you can't not pay payroll taxes. Even if you go out of business, you still have to pay that. It becomes a personal liability of the individual. So that's one of the implications we have to remember, is that, the deferment of taxes, it might give you some freedom of cash, but you've got to be sure that you've got a plan in place to manage those taxes when they come due, if you take advantage of that part of the legislation. So those are one of the things that really jumped out at me, was this whole notion of deferring your taxes, because a lot of the payroll companies say you can check this box and you don't have to pay your payroll taxes, and it helps, lower your cash outlays. But we just got to be mindful of that bill is going to come due.
Right. And I would assume when you're kind of back to normal, you still have to pay the taxes that we're regularly due, in addition to now what you deferred.
Exactly.
Right? So you've got to figure out what that payment structure sort of looks like, right? Should you be looking at adding on to stuff monthly? Because you've got to keep the other one still current.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
One example that I wanted to share was with not just federal taxes, but also state taxes. Maryland, where we also have offices, has estate inheritance taxes. So when you're thinking about business partnerships, so if your partner passed away and then you inherited part of the business, that's a 15% death tax, right? So we need to be thinking about and preparing for and looking at not just the federal taxes, but state taxes as well.
Right. And I think, we know that people, basically, if I was bringing on an accountant or if I was bringing on an attorney, right, it's usually based on who had the time or the money to afford them. But there is that sort of penny wise, pound foolish thought process, because now it's probably more urgent than ever to really get a professional involved, and you can determine what level of guidance you're getting, right? Sort of manage whatever the expense is, but it just feels to me to be much more critical.
Well, you know what, to Amy's point about you got to pay this 15% inheritance tax, based on what? You got to have accounting records, right? So because if you don't, the IRS is going to say, we think, and then or the state will say they'll look at based on revenues that they see, and they'll kind of say, we don't know about your expenses, so we're not going to assume your expenses.
That's right. Your valuation, the valuation that there's no record in place, and if there's no plan, you got to go with that, unless you can spend the money later, which of course, as we know, you pay more in a crisis and a fire sale than you do later.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, what they think is kind of what goes. You have nothing documented, right? It doesn't matter what you think. It's really what they think.
Exactly.
Right. And actually, back to one of the things that Bridget said, trusted advisors, is I know that many of the organizations that I support had on-ground contracts for events. Right. So those are the times when we're coming up to say, no, we don't want the penalty because of the force majeure. Right. So there are times when an investment of a lawyer so that you can get out of some stuff, right? As opposed to have to pay the penalties. So it is those are the implications. We have to pivot now in so many circumstances and situations. What are our opportunities to make that truly as pain, to minimize the pain? It's not painless. It's not like painless.
That's right. It's not painless at all. You're right. You're right. You're absolutely right.
And I think that's an important thing Amy is saying, is that you have to think about it creates another thing about cash flow management, right?
Mhm.
So we have to think about how we manage our cash differently. Like Amy said, we can't just look at, okay, I have a penalty of X. Okay, I'm just going to pay it. Well, guess what? You might have been able to pay, whatever the number is, you might have been able to pay Amy 30% of that number,
Right.
and get half of it taken off. So does it then, now it's always about managing and thinking through how you're managing your cash,
Mhm.
right? And that's what the question is right now, is cash management.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Amy, another question for you. I think I spoke about this earlier. Legislation was kind of being written on the fly, or for lack of a better constructive term about it, right? And a lot of it around based on the needs of, trying to make sure, for instance, that Black business owners got in, that small business owners got in, that nonprofits, churches, and the like, right? That everybody was being taken care of as part of this piece. Because there were all of these changes, have you identified any key changes that may have gotten lost in the conversation? So something that started off, a perfect example was at the beginning of this, I want to say, early April, 1099 independent contractors could be included in a business's payroll. Like 2 days later, that switched, right? And then 1099 folks were like me, were kind of on your own. You had to sort of file for yourself, and the company had to really file as to what was considered to be employees, right? Have there been other changes that you've been aware of that probably have gotten lost in the conversation? Because as we said, things were changing like almost daily.
So I think part of it is there is, and I don't think it's stopped yet. Right? Being clear about that, I don't think it's stopped yet, because one, we know this isn't going to be over in 2.5 months, right? And two, that the outcry from the disparate impact has been great. So I do believe, although they're trying to, they wanted to sort of find that answer for the 1099s. I mean, there are folks like who've I think will create an outcry about the certification portion as well.
Right.
I think there's going to become greater clarity on what they're going to say is how do we truly certify that there was a need. I think that's going to happen. It's got to happen. So when those things, it's an evolving process, and I think unfortunately things are going to happen about, especially those places that are going to be forced to close because of a resurgence.
Right. It has me thinking a little bit, and I know this is just kind of, as we're having this conversation, has me almost thinking, going back to the days of time stamping. Remember back when we used to time stamp everything when they came in? It sort of feels like that if you don't sort of make a note on, a piece of paper, on an email, on whatever it is that you're seeing, make a note when it came through and kind of attach whatever you did to that you can really be caught in something that was okay 2 weeks ago, and now is not.
But back to the point that I had said earlier, you are bound to what your agreement is. Now the reality is, round one people have one agreement, round two people may have a different
another.
And so, but then back to, as Bridget was saying, the institution is built of people. You need to make sure that you are being held to the standard that you've signed on to, right? Because although it may be the clerk number 462 is going to say you didn't have this box checked, but that wasn't part of my form. So, but we have to be our own best advocate and be mindful of what was round 2 versus round 4, so expectations and standards, and then make sure that all of my I's are dotted, my T's are crossed for my round 2.
That makes a lot of sense. In our last webinar, we were talking about intellectual property. We talked a lot about business continuity in that space, as well as backing up things. But I always think about what people are thinking about, because I think in this environment, right, the pivoting has had to happen so quickly. And you have to come up with a new idea like that, right? How am I gonna make money at what I normally do? When, for instance, as I do, and you all know, I do a lot of events, right? Suddenly, I can't be in front of people anymore, right? How's that shift for me? How am I gonna do that? So what are you how are you counseling clients? What implications are you seeing, particularly around IP, where there are all of these new ideas that have had to come out as a result of being isolated, in a room all day long?
So actually, Bridget and I are both people who have a lot of on ground kinds of presentations as well.
Mhm.
But what I think one of the things that we've walked away from with this is we have to be constantly moving, because if Bridget had an amazing event. Was it last week or the week before?
Mhm.
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 The reality is someone's going to see that, and because it's global, we can see it from anywhere in the world, they're going to copy it.
Right.
So we have to be consistently in motion looking for the next idea. We can't say that was great, let me do it again, because somebody else is doing it. So,
Mhm.
and you can't put a non-disclosure agreement because the whole wide world is seeing our stuff now.
Right.
So we've got to be continuously moving, evolving, and positioning ourselves to say, I am exceptional, our firm is exceptional for this reason, and you can get this here. But, and we are continuing to grow. We are continuing to move. We are continuing to stay ahead of the curve.
Mhm.
And then those people who follow us are behind.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point, Amy.
So a couple questions for both of you. Because we talked a little bit about, Bridget's event that she had. What resources are also out there? I think about, obviously doing things like this, right, to make sure that people are kept abreast, of changes and sort of what's going on. What other resources are you all aware of on both the tax side and the legal side that people should be taking advantage of?
Well, first, before all of those sides, the U.S. Black Chambers.
Yes, Amy, you stole my thought.
I set you up for that really nicely, right?
You did. I had to jump in quick because Bridget was going to say it first. Not just the U.S. Black Chambers, but all of the regional and local affiliates of the U.S.
Right.
Black Chambers.
Right.
Because one of the things we know that there are large corporations who are feeling the pain, but they don't know our pain, right? We always say that Black folks get, when white folks get a cold, Black folks get pneumonia. And that I truly believe is evidenced through this COVID. So we know what we're living, we know what we're speaking. And so those folks who have a mission and vision and purpose to serve our community typically are members of the Black Chamber. And so therefore it's a resource pool that is unparalleled.
I would agree with that 100%. And I would also say where I, in my profession as a CPA, I stay connected to the AICPA. And the AICPA is like U.S. Black Chamber, is in the legislation. They understand, they're looking at it and calculating the numbers. That's how it was brought to my attention about the tax implications, right? Because I'm listening to the AICPA resources and I'm going on their website and I'm saying, okay, what's going on? SBA.gov is where you can, is another resource. I know, it's like a lot of people, what I've learned, are not familiar with the Small Business Administration. How you cannot be at this point in time is sort of amazing, but there's millions and millions of people, but the SBA.gov is a great resource and a great tool. The Minority Business Development Agency has some resources as well. Your local tax providers, right? Your accountants, your lawyers, accountants.
The National Bar Association.
Exactly. So
Black lawyers.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that we do is make sure that, like, I'm a part of an organization called the Division of Firms, where it's all the Black CPA firms, the trade association for the Black CPA firms. Stay connected with them. So just really, because I'm hearing things that my colleagues aren't, and my colleagues are hearing things that I'm not, and we're putting it to the test and saying, because for us, from an accounting perspective, we're thinking not only, okay, what is the legislation say? We're saying, how do you implement? I'm implementing the legislation. Amy has a legal document. It's my job to take what she says and create the execution of it from the numbers perspective. So that's why hearing from the experts in those areas is really important. And I mean, I heard someone say once, that when you're listening to advice, you don't want it from too many secondary or tertiary places, because, you know, you're getting kind of an interpretation, right? We want to get really good guidance that is substantiated. So that's why we recommend those.
And as well as, I mean, just sort of do the legal disclaimers that, you know, this is not, we're not providing advice right now, we're providing general information. So when you have the opportunity to speak to someone who is speaking to your facts, the answer we learned in law school that the answer to every question is it depends, because the facts are different, right? And so while we know that business owners so often, because we're business owners too, are, you know, in midst of doing our stuff, you need to have a conversation with people who can focus solely on your business. Right. So while we're at the chamber events, while we're at the, for us, you know, the bar events, getting the information, but then give us the time to focus on you.
Right. That's great.
Right. And I will say, you know, the work that USBC has been doing, particularly in the advocacy space, as a lot of this was written, was really critical to ensuring that lots of people did not get left out. Now, the way it was implemented may have happened a little bit differently. The way that it was written was to really be a little bit more inclusive, particularly as it related to Black firms. So when we look at, and I think your point is right, you know, the SBA is responsible for all of this. So how can you not go to the SBA site? At the end of the day, right, they wrote the rules for the banks.
Exactly.
You know, so you've got to go to the places where this information originated.
Exactly.
Well, I, you know, is I appreciate saying that, but what we know is people don't.
Yes.
Right. And it's overwhelming because there can be so much, right? Sometimes, and I will confess that their legalese is sometimes written in such a way that it's created to be overwhelming. Right? Because we want to make sure, you know, we write about the disparate impact or disparate treatment or anything like that.
Right.
But that's why we start at the SBA, so at least you know the questions to ask.
Yes.
Right? And then get with people who are, I mean, one of our greatest successes, as we were talking about, is being with like-minded people to get the information. And if we need to do, you know, sort of check here, then check back, you know, but making sure that you find the iron and sharpening iron so that we can get the information that's true and relevant to you.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we spend a lot of time even in the creation of the COVID-19 resource landing page that was created on the USBC site, specifically so that we could tease out what was real, what was not, what was going to be relevant, what, as everything changed, what was going to be important for you to know today, and to really have it as a place where you can kind of go and get that information from these other resources, right? Kind of in one place. So to your point, I think that is so critical. So I'm thinking we've got, you know, you've got folks now talking about phase one, you know, of loosening up a little bit. I'll tell you, I was a little taken aback because my phase one was, I'm still masked up. I still got gloves, right? And I was out this weekend, and so lots of folks with no masks and no gloves, right? So but from a business perspective, you have to be thinking about that. In addition to, how are you moving forward, right? Because even as this is happening, you still have to move forward as a business owner. You've still got to figure out what the next steps are going to be. You still got to determine what your revenue is going to look like. So as you're looking at coming to the end of what does tax preparation look like for 2020, what does planning look like for 2021? What are you saying? Because I will tell you, I had a plan for 2020 that by February 28th, they completely out the window. So what are you telling folks to do?
First of all, take a deep breath and get an advisor. Let me tell you, I say that because so you have, from my perspective, you've got two things going. You've got a personal situation you got to deal with, your personal taxes and your business taxes. And sometimes your personal and your business are laying on top of each other, right? Because if you're an LLC single member, you're filing a Schedule C return. Right. What does that mean, right?
Right.
Because, and I'm going to take a real quick diversion with respect to the PPP application, was that if you were a 1099, you could use your Schedule C, but you couldn't have a loss.
Right.
So you could use that to go after those. And you still can, because the funding's still open. But the thing that we're telling people, because back to what Amy said, everybody's situation is different. And so it's important that you get professional advice. That is what we're telling our clients. Well, of course, we're giving them the professional advice vis-a-vis our tax partners and what we're doing. And we're telling people when we're out speaking, and we're find a trusted advisor. It's important. And it's important. And as Amy mentioned, we did this, the seminar that we did a couple of weeks ago was Not Your Average Banker and Finding a Banking Relationship. So, and back to again what Amy said about when we look at the CARES Act and the implications to us individually, you got to talk to your bank. If you got the money, you got to go to your bank who gave you the money, because that's who your agreement is with.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Because so it's really important to get advice for your specific situation, because as many people as there are on the planet are as many different iterations of any advice. You know what I mean? I'd love to say, okay, well, save more money, spend. I mean, well, we're naturally spending less money. Hopefully we're not all on Amazon, shopping, for, oh, by the way, I need this. But being mindful of your cash. I mean, really holding on to cash. I think if there's one advice that I can say is to hold on to your cash. Mm-hmm. But again, that's kind of like, I'm not driving anymore, so I'm not spending money on gas. I gave up my parking, so I'm not spending on that. I'm not eating out at all. So, you know what I mean? So we're naturally saving more money personally. And so on the business side, it's, again, if you get the PPP money, you got to get good advice, because that thing can go a million different ways if you're not managing it correctly.
What about you, Amy? What are you telling folks? How are you getting ready for the end of the year, and we're coming into 2021?
Well, again, I feel like I'm joining one note with begin with the end in mind. Mm-hmm. Right? So that, what do you see for your future? What do you see for the business's future? How do we plan for it? How do we have stuff in place? So if indeed you get sick, if indeed you die, if indeed you want to sell, are things in place to make it happen? Mm-hmm. So it is, while we can create the greatest vision ever, we need to have a plan for it no matter what.
Yeah, that is true. That is absolutely true. I'm going to skip this question because we talked about, but I'm going to go back to it a little bit. I want to ask a couple of questions we got from folks using the landing page and sending their questions in via the form. The first question is, I received my PPP loan, but I'm only starting to review the fine print. I'm using the money based on my need. Could I be in jeopardy on what I signed and agreed to vis-a-vis what I might have checked off or signed my paperwork?
Yep.
Short and sweet. Yes, you are.
You signed it. You're in it, and
right.
and I mean, I think that Bridget will speak to that. Even you have to use it in a way that you have to use it. I mean, it'd be great to say I want to use it for the we want you to use it for payroll. However, if you got contracts that also need to be fulfilled, like you need to buy inventory, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And the terms, are such that, you may be able to sort of benefit either way with that.
Mm-hmm. And I think
your thoughts?
And to Amy's point, let's say you went into this thing and you had 15, 20, 10, 5 employees when you applied for it.
Right.
You get the money and you're in a business that your staff is saying, yeah, I'm not coming to work. Mm-hmm. I'm not. So you've lost your staff, not because necessarily you didn't have the money to pay them. They're like, yeah, I'm not coming in. Amy mentioned they might have children at home. They need to be at home.
Mhm.
you know, or you're a grocery store, you're some, you know, some entity that
Your
you
restaurant.
go to work, right? And you
Mhm.
like, I'm not going to work. So
Mhm.
you're losing workforce just because of the impact, whether someone has COVID-19 or not, but people's anxiety about wanting
Mhm.
to be out.
Mhm.
So you could get this money based on what was the situation at the time, but then it changes.
Mhm.
To your point, like you said, the legislation literally changed day by day by day, and it's still changing, and its interpretation thereof is changing, right?
Right.
So, so I think it's important to keep in mind that in part it's the spirit of it, right? Were you being malicious about how you use the money? You know what I mean? If
Mhm.
you applied for it according to the rules and the regulations, and you did what was appropriate, and then your circumstance changed, there's nothing you can do about that.
Right.
Also, this goes back to actually Bridget's event a couple of weeks ago
Mhm.
about if you got your PPP from your banker and you have a relationship with your banker, it makes a huge difference.
Mhm. It does.
Exactly.
It absolutely does. Yeah. Because you can talk through the mechanics of what might need to happen, right? So for instance, maybe those employees aren't coming back. You can potentially hire other employees to take their place. Or as we've seen, other people have given back money. I think there's a
Mhm.
rule in terms of length of time, but
That's
they've
right.
given back those funds. Or to your point, Amy, I needed to buy inventory now. So that might not be forgiven. It's still
The terms are
a
favorable.
purpose that can be used under PPP.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Here's another question. So this is somebody that had been waiting for an approval. They really need the money. And while they realize that it really is only 2 months worth of expenses, what should they still need to do? What do you recommend that they do going forward to keep their business afloat, even in this sort of turbulent time of waiting, playing the waiting game?
The worst, the painful reality is nothing is guaranteed,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we can't hold on with knowing that, that with the plan that I'm going to get it. There isn't that guarantee.
Right.
So we need to look at every potential option that exists if indeed we need it. If we're not going to be able to stay afloat without it, we need to figure out what are our closing plans going to be,
Mm-hmm.
or our next steps. But nothing is guaranteed. If the totality of our existence is I will only survive if I get this, that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's not a good space.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think too, in some of the legislation, you know, or not even necessarily some states, back to Amy's point about what the states are doing. For instance, mortgage. I got a notice about my mortgage that
Mm-hmm.
my bank is required to give me an extension and not charge me fees. So part of it is you have to do something. No, you can't
Right.
not do something. So it's being engaged and being active. If you've got debts, contact the people you owe.
Student loans, right?
Right?
Yes, student loans, yes.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Contact people. Contact your bank. Contact your whoever your creditors are. Contact, you know what I mean? Just reach out and make those connections to people. Don't just sit and do nothing. I think you can't just you should just engage. And because what you'll find out is as you engage and you contact people and you say, okay, I need an extension. Maybe you get an extension. And again, it's not a guarantee, but at least you haven't just said, I'm giving up. I think we have to remain hopeful because COVID-19 is not going to take us all out. There is life going forward. And I think, Amy, you sort of alluded to this, that it's pivot time. It's like, okay, I got to think about my business differently. Take off the anxiety and worry hat. I think we have to put on the creativity hat, switch that hat, because we can get so consumed with, is this bad thing going to happen, that we miss an opportunity to find the creative and find, okay, I can do this, or maybe I can barter, or maybe somebody can do this for me. We've had a lot of people that we've bartered with in this time that needed, they needed what we had and I needed what they had. So we bartered. So you just have to rethink and pivot, as was said before.
I think of entrepreneurs are a whole unique breed in general.
Right.
And so we have learned to take nothing and make something.
Mhm.
So we can just do that by shaping, and what necessity is a mother of invention, as we don't get bogged down looking for what might come. Let's make something happen.
That's
And,
good.
and then be blessed by the if it does come. So we're still moving, because again, this is not a short-term experience. This is
Right.
not a short-term reality.
Right. And to that point of making something happen, as USBC board members, I really want to give both of you the opportunity to really talk about your businesses a little bit in this space. I don't think there's any other space to do this in. There's no better space to do this, but to also really, in addition to really talking about what you do, there's a lot of stuff that you do. I would call it more volunteer, because it's more of a calling than it is volunteerism in terms of what you do. I mean, you don't charge for some of these things that you do. They really are a benefit to the community. So I want to give you the opportunity to really talk about it before we close today, because I really think it's important. I think, obviously so full disclosure, everybody, I've known them 10 years, right? So I've worked with them and a lot of other things. So this is a real joy for me to be able to share them with you, because there's so much information that they have. And there's so much that they just do from goodness of their hearts in terms of really being committed and dedicated, in particular to making sure that Black business owners have what they need to be successful. So I want to give you, both of you, the opportunity to really talk about your businesses and some of the things that you have coming up.
Well, I will say, thank you, Elisa. For me, serving on the USBC board is really, I know I'm in rooms. I know being in the boardrooms that I've been affiliated with US Black Chamber, I'm in that room going, wow. You can see I literally sometimes would feel like I could see Dr. King and Malcolm X in that room going, yes, yes, yes. Because really the spirit of being the voice of Black business is really who we are. And all the board members, we are really about, Gina Page said it in our seminar. She said she's about the business of being Black. And we're about the business of primarily helping Black business owners. Now, we have a plethora of other clients, but our hearts and our desire is to really see our people and our businesses grow. We, as a CPA firm, my team and I, we talk about who's our avatar, who are we targeting. We really target Black female founders. That's who we really want to help, Black women business owners. Now, do we help other businesses? Yes, because it's just because our Black female founders refer people to us and people find us and we have synergy. So we provide a full suite of accounting, financial management, cash flow management. Especially during this environment, what we're seeing is people really want to know, where's my cash going? And we really help people, we help facilitate that with businesses. And so we work with small growing firms, 1 to 3 years in business, $3 to $5 million in sales, 10 to 15, up to 10, maybe 15 employees. So if you're, that's who we really serve, but we do a lot of training and education. As Amy said thank you, Amy, for sharing about our event. We did an event called Not Your Average Banker, where we talked about relationships with why it's important to have a relationship with a banker. And it was really the ABCs, an accountant, a banker, and your chamber. So those are the 3 important people in your ecosystem we believe you should have, relationship with. And we could say the A is an attorney too, Amy. So, but because we also know how important it is to have them on your A team. We call that our A team. But really, and we're doing a challenge right now, the Not Your Average Banker Summit Challenge. We're going to be doing some more training, and that's where we really get to impact some of the smaller startups. Is come to some of our trainings. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. We have a Not Your Average Bean Counter bookkeeper boot camp that we do, where we train people how to be bookkeepers. So those are really some of the high level things, and we'll have a link for people to connect with us that I'm sure you guys will share. So thank you so much for allowing us to talk a little bit about who we are.
Absolutely. And Amy?
Thank you, Lisa. So I became an estate planning attorney because I saw, as I was serving entrepreneurs, how that they'd start creating wealth and then they die and we'd lose the wealth to the community, in the community. And so I said, okay, gee, how can we fix this? We look at our racial wealth gap, and we know part of that is because inheritance is lost each year. So the Griffin firm is committed to creating, protecting, and transferring wealth. And so working to help educate people on how to do that. We don't know a lot of stuff about how do we transfer that wealth. 70% of Black people die without an estate plan, right? So that means we lose so much. I'm excited because we're able to educate our community on how does it look like in a way that we can create. We hear about how the state takes your house if you go to nursing home. We hear about how it goes in unclaimed property, and it's all true, but we don't take the steps that are necessary to protect those assets. And we do workshops on business succession. We're doing one next month on Delaware trust. How do you create a trust in Delaware so that the income that you have is not taxed? Avoiding those state income taxes. All of those things that we don't know a lot about because as a community, it's not something that we typically have invested in. I say that estate planning is such an integral part of financial planning because I don't want my kids and my grandkids to have to start all over again with each new generation. I think about how do we support one another to build our wealth. Not just, I don't want them to just be able to go to school and come out with like debt, right? But come out, with a trust fund that I have supported their education to come through. We can do all of that. How do we make sure that the businesses that we pass to our families, even if our children don't want to be, my daughter doesn't want to be an estate planning attorney, but she's a lawyer, but she can benefit from the ownership. Right. How do we plan those things out?
Yeah, I think that's so important. And as you know, ladies, I'm always so thankful to have an opportunity to spend time and talk with you and hear your insights. So I so appreciate you being here with us today. Your as I said earlier, your dedication, your commitment to this work is awe-inspiring, and you help us not only learn, but you help us model new behaviors, and I think that is so important, particularly in this day and time. So I wish you love and health and wealth and staying safe. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to share with everyone else, please continue to look and sign up for our upcoming webinars. You can sign up in advance, as we said, going to our page at usblackchambers.org/cares-act/. Send us your questions in advance. We try to tailor these to the things that we're hearing from you and to make sure that you're getting information that you need. Finally, please visit us again at usblackchambers.org. If you're not a member, please consider becoming a member with us. You can receive valuable information like this all the time. So we'd love for you to be part of us. And until next time, enjoy your day and please stay safe.